Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Cutter One. I am your host, Jay Just Jay, your resident troublemaker and your resident culture warrior. All right, I hope you are all doing well on this Thursday. We are one day closer to the weekend and one day closer to being able to relax and find our inner peace. Anyway, at least that's the hope, right? All right, so let's get right into it. We got another article coming to us from CBR.com, and this is also coming to us from Blake Hawkins. And it says, Lord of the Rings Isildur'S Army of the Dead curse had primordial implications. When Isildur cursed the men of the White Mountains, he prevented them from dying, which was a disruption of Lord of the Rings' gift of men. The Lord of the Rings is filled with otherworldly beings. There were immortal elves and godlike Maiar, such as Gandalf and Sauron. But there were actual ghosts, too. The Barrow-wight nearly killed Frodo and the other hobbits in the Fellowship of the Ring. Then the Nazgul, Sauron's deadly servants, who were trapped between life and death, constantly made things difficult during the War of the Ring. However, the group of ghosts that had the largest impact on the trilogy was the Army of the Dead. It didn't show up until the Return of the King, but it changed the tide of the war. In the movie version, the Army of the Dead arrived and outright won the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. While the army wasn't as much of a deus ex machina in the book version, it still ensured that Sauron didn't win the day. Here's why Isildur cursed them in the first place and why his curse had primordial implications. When Gondor was founded, Isildur went to the men of the White Mountains, who swore to fight for him when the time came. Years later, Isildur called on them during the War of the Last Alliance, but they refused to fight because they had begun to worship Sauron. So, Isildur cursed them to never rest until they fulfilled their oath. With no other options, the men disappeared into the mountains. 3,000 years later, Aragorn gave them the opportunity to make good, revealing himself as Isildur's heir. Aragorn called on them to fight in the War of the Ring. They did so and were released from their curse, or from the curse. However, it's worth noting that Isildur's curse went against the very nature of creation. Middle-earth was created during the Ainulindale, where the Valar and the Maiar worked together to create the physical world. But the Valar and the Maiar couldn't create life, which was why Morgoth caused discord and accidentally created Ungoliant. Okay, I'll come back to that. Only Eru Ilúvatar could create life, and he did so in two different strains. The firstborn children of Ilúvatar were the immortal elves, and the secondborn was the race of men. Because they were immortal, many elves were haughty and looked down on the race of men. Yet Eru didn't create men with any lesser intentions. Eru created the elves as immortal beings, but to his secondborn, Eru gave the gift of men. That gift was the ability to die and pass on. So while the elves became weary of life and started to fade, men never had to deal with that hardship. With all that in mind, Isildur's curse was explicitly against the design of creation. Ilúvatar created men so that they could die, but Isildur prevented the men of the White Mountain from dying. That explains why the army of the dead desperately wanted to be free, because they weren't created to exist for so long. So when Aragorn freed the ghosts from their oath, instead of sending them against Sauron, he allowed them the freedom to return to the natural order of things. All right. I mean, conceptually, yes, I don't really find a lot wrong with this article. There's some finer details. I was not aware that Morgoth had accidentally created Ungoliant, but I suppose I could go back to my copy of the Silmarillion and read it again. I think I may have missed that chapter, so I don't know where that's coming from. But yeah, I mean, again, I think it oversimplifies things a little bit. There's more to it than just the elves are immortal beings, and the men get to die and pass on, while the elves become weary of life and start to fade. I mean, I think it's true it's true in the same way that if, you know, somebody says, well, what's the weather like? And you say, it's nice. Okay, well, I suppose then if I step outside and it's clear blue skies, right? And, you know, it's not raining, I suppose you were correct. It's nice, right? But you left out the part where the wind chill, it's windy. There's 20-mile-an-hour wind gusts, and the wind chill is making it like minus 20 degrees, right? Fahrenheit. I don't know what that would be, Celsius. Um, then it might not feel so nice, right? But I mean, the general description would apply, right? I asked what was the weather like. You said it was nice. I guess technically, it's nice, but you left out the part where it's like absolutely frigid, and I'm getting hypothermia just walking from my front door to my car, right? And I think that's sort of with the description here of just like, well, the elves, become weary of life and start to fade, and men never have to deal with that hardship because they have the ability to die and pass on. That's true. Okay. I mean, I think that's a surface level explanation of it. Because as a lot of you guys know, part of it is like the elves are tied to Arda itself. So as long as there's an Arda, there will be elves, right? Like that's sort of like a key point involved in their immortality, right? And it's not just that that men have the ability to die and pass on. It's that men get to go beyond, right? They get to, nobody knows where their souls, their Faya, if you will, go after they die, right? Like, I think they spend some time in the halls of Mandos, but I could be wrong on that part. But ultimately, their spirit is allowed to go beyond, right? The assumption being to be with Eru, okay, with Iluvatar, okay? Whereas the elves don't get that. The elves are sort of locked into being with Arda until Arda is no more, right? And so, I mean, that's like a deeper level take on it, and I'm sure in the discussions below, in the comment section below, we can go even deeper into it, right? Because it's a lot there. It's a very conceptual thing. It's one of those aspects of the Silmarillion that I think turns a lot of people off because they're expecting it to be more of a traditional novel like Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, and then they get it and it's more biblical in the way it presents things. But it's a lot of high concept stuff, right? And that being one of them, right? The difference between, the elves have this immortality that mortals would sort of envy, right? You get to live forever, right? But the elves don't necessarily see it that way. They kind of are like, yeah, but after a while it gets old, right? Things get old, things get weary. You see things growing old and decaying around you. And so, they see men sort of having this sort of envy of that. But whereas the elves are sort of envious of men, and I'm not saying they're envious of men, but in that scene in Return of the King, scene in that part of the book in Return of the King where Arwen is talking with Aragorn after, where she's talking about, how, she's made her choice and stuff like that, and now how she finally understands where mortals are coming from and their perspective of it, how it's looked at as the gift of men, but how they may not necessarily see it that way because there's a lot of unknown involved in it, right? And so yeah, I mean, I can't really argue with a lot of what what this article is saying in terms of that. Now, I will say that one of the things that isn't mentioned in this article, and they're talking about, is this whole idea of curses and oaths and stuff like that. And because this isn't the first time that somebody has either made a curse/oath, and apparently in Middle Earth, when you do those, and especially when you do them in the name of say Eru, right? Or on that level. Um, it's sort of a binding thing. Like it's a real thing. It's not like how we turn around and be like, "Oh, I swear to whoever I will whoop your ass," right? Um, in Middle Earth, like when you make a, let's take Feanor, okay? Um, and his oath and stuff like that. If you make an oath or you issue a curse, depending on the severity of what's going on, for lack of a better term, the gods can hear it, and and in Feanor's case and Isildur's case, can turn around and be like, yeah, okay, that's cool. We'll back that play. Um, and I find that interesting. It's sort of they say Isildur's curse, but you got to understand that in Middle Earth, you can put a curse on somebody and it's a legit thing, right? Same way you can take an oath and don't think you're going to take an oath on Tuesday and break it on Wednesday. That's not how oaths and curses work in Middle Earth. You don't do them lightly. Okay, there's a reason why they're few and far between, right? Because they, the powers that be, if you will turn around and be like, okay, so it shall be written, so it shall be done, and the army of the dead found that out. You know what I mean? So I find it interesting that I think that could be an interesting topic for discussion. Sort of the implications and what are the moral and ethical implications of that, right? Like, if I make an oath to fight for you, but then when you actually say, hey, I need you to come fight for me, and I'm like, oh, I can't, sorry, dude, like I got the kids and the in-laws are in town, sorry, bro, maybe next time, and stuff like that. Well, I've made an oath and I've broken that oath now. So if you turn around and be like, okay, well, you've broken your oath, and because of that, I'm cursing you that you will not get to rest until you fulfill your oath, right? You know, in our world, that's just kind of like silly. We're like, yeah, all right, whatever, dude. Um, but in Middle Earth, that's like an honest thing. That's like a legit thing. You don't do that shit lightly and think that it's just gonna, become a non-starter. Like the powers that be will follow through. And it is interesting. It's interesting that Isildur could place a curse on them, which in essence prevented them from partaking of the gift of men, i.e., death. Right? But see, and this is where I start to ask certain things, like certain questions. Right? Like, would it be Isildur's curse, or would it be you've broken your oath? Right? Because we've seen there's precedent for oaths, right, being adhered to, like the Valar being very big on, like, okay, you made this oath, you better follow through, because if you don't follow through, there's going to be hell to pay, right? So I'm curious as to it being more Isildur's ability to curse them, or would it be more them breaking an oath in the eyes of the Valar or Eru or the powers that be? Interesting question. Anyway, I just wanted to touch base with that. It's an interesting article. Again, not a lot that I want to nitpick on it, other than maybe implying that Morgoth created Ungoliant. I suppose you could make that argument, but I never really thought of it in those terms. But anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments section below. Where do you stand on Isildur's curse? Do you think it was more about him having the ability to curse them, or do you think it was more about broken oaths? And if you swear an oath in Middle Earth, it's not something to just take lightly. Like, you better be willing to follow through. Just ask Feanor and his crew. So do you think it was more about Isildur's curse versus the oath being broken? And them swearing an oath, right? The same way Feanor and there was the oath of Feanor, right? Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I think it's a good topic for conversation, especially, sci-fi, or I should say fantasy Tolkien fans. It is a good question to toss around and, get some different perspectives and different takes on it. I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say down in the comment section below. All right, folks, that'll do it for this one. Remember, if you like the video, like the video. If you feel like sharing the video, by all means, get it out there. It helps with the algorithm. It helps us keep moving. I'm going to try and hit that magic 1,000. I would like to do it before the summer. Which still gives us time, but it's weird. I keep seeing the subscriber numbers fluctuate. Sometimes they'll be like up to like 673 or something like that, and then like the next day they're down to 670, and the next day they're up to 671, and then so I'm trying to aim for 1,000 by the summer, right? And when I say the summer, I don't know. Let's say July 1st, right? So I'm shooting for 1,000. So if you like the video, give it a like. If you want to share the video, and by all means, I would be totally okay if you want to. Share the video out or spread the word of the channel. If you are involved in the comments of some of your other similar channels, right? Because it does help with the algorithm. It helps it get seen. It helps drive traffic. So that will be very helpful. And also, if you haven't already and you are considering, I would hope that you would be considering subscribing to the channel and joining the army of beautiful badasses as we fight the good fight for the professor and his works, as well as other fantasy stuff as well. And if you are a returning subscriber, checking out the video, as always, you guys are the best. I appreciate you, and from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And okay, I think that's going to do it for this one. So until the next time, I will see, until next time, be good, be safe, be awesome, but more importantly, stay more dorkish. Peace.